Thank you, everyone. We're starting session 2, and this session is how do we facilitate completion of the construction of the needed generation resources. As previously noted, please do not discuss any open cases pending before the commission. And what we're going to do, starting with Katie Augustin, each of our panelists will introduce themselves very briefly, state why you're here today, why you're interested in this topic, and we will kick it off with Katie.
Good morning, and thank you to the commissioners for the invitation to participate on today's panel. I am Katie Augustin. I am a senior project manager for New Nuclear at the Nuclear Energy Institute, or NEI. NEI is a Washington, D.C. based policy and membership organization. Our vision is a world powered by clean and reliable energy, and our mission is to promote the use and growth of nuclear energy through efficient operations and effective policy. As the National Trade Association for the Commercial Nuclear Energy Industry, NEI represents the policy interests of over 340 members, including nuclear power plant owners and operators, reactor designers and advanced technology companies, architect and engineering firms, fuel suppliers and service companies, consulting services and manufacturing companies, companies involved in nuclear medicine and nuclear industrial applications, radionuclide and radiopharmaceutical companies, universities and research laboratories, law firms, and labor unions. Across the U.S., our currently operating nuclear energy facilities produce half of our nation's clean electricity. That's approximately 100 gigawatts electric, rain or shine, 24/7, 365. The energy sector in the U.S. has undergone significant transformation over the last decade, and that transformation, with demand growing, will continue. NEI recently conducted a survey of our member utilities and found that these utilities anticipate both extending the lives of the current reactors and adding more than 100 gigawatts of new nuclear power by the 2050s to guarantee reliable access to clean energy. Non-electric sectors such as industrial heat and transportation are also considering nuclear energy to transition to a reliable, clean, and affordable energy supply. Ensuring that state energy policies are in place to support preserving and expanding nuclear generation is essential to ensuring an affordable, secure, and resilient energy sector well into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is E.J. Fike, Vesper Energy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me today. My name is E.J. Fike. I'm the Senior Community Affairs Manager for Vesper Energy. We are a utility-scale solar and storage developer based out of Dallas, Texas. We currently have around 49 projects in development across the country at various stages, and I am currently the manager of 11 projects on the East Coast, 4 of them here in Pennsylvania, 5 in Michigan, a couple other states as well.
Thank you. Joe Calpine.
Yeah, good morning. Joe Cressman from Calpine, and thank you, commissioners, for having me. So Calpine, really quickly, we're a national IPP, competitive retail provider as well, mostly C&I customers. We also own the nation's largest cogen fleet, 27,000 megawatts of installed capacity, 78 facilities, mostly highly efficient combined cycle plants. We do have 725 megawatts of geothermal in California. We are the largest geothermal operator in the country, in the world, actually, at this point in time. Battery storage, we just brought on 590 megawatts in Texas and 2,000 more megawatts under development. We are an early mover in carbon capture. We have 2 major carbon capture projects underway, which again gives a frame of reference in terms of what we do. We build things, basically. We build and then we own and then we operate. So we have Baytown. It's a nominal $1 billion project. We did secure about up to a $270 million support from the DOE. It will be 95% carbon reduction, 2 million metric tons per year. Removed. California, Sutter, again, 95% carbon reduction, 1.7 million metric tons per year. Again, nominal $1 billion project, 270 million of support coming from DOE. We have several projects under development right now in Texas, a 460 megawatt peaker, delivery date of May of 2026. We're also adding to an existing cogen plant as well, expanding that also. In PJM, we have about 5,000 megawatts of installed capacity. Our PA assets are York and Bethlehem Energy Centers, combined a little over 2,500 megawatts, combined cycle gas plants. However, they are dual fueled. So we are dual fueled back at all of our combined cycles in Pennsylvania. Similarly, though, our combined cycle plant in Delaware is also dual fuel. And we have a peaker plant in Illinois, 500 megawatts. I think it may be the only dual fuel peaker plant. So we are very much committed to dual fuel as a means for managing gas risk as well. We did announce a few months back that we are focused now on ramping up development in PJM. We have several things underway right now in other states. PA will be a focus, I think, at some point. However, the path is a little less certain given the RGGI overhang right now, and we are, obviously have to navigate through that. Just to give you a frame of reference, if we had to put a RGGI cost into our bids for our Pennsylvania plants, it would add $1.25, approximately $1.25 to our energy market offers. And that we have to do that right now in Delaware. Our Hayrow plant is the exact same plant as the plant in Bethlehem, and the plant in Bethlehem made a whole lot more megawatt hours than the plant in Delaware. So, we'd have to consider if we would double down on that risk, and right now we're just not quite certain on that just yet. And then we'll talk more about the things that I think PA can do relative to encouraging development. So, thanks.
Thank you. Darren Olaguis from Talon.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you to the commission staff for organizing today's technical conference. My name is Darren Olaguis. I'm the Chief Development Officer for Talon. Talon appreciates the opportunity to discuss the challenges around building new generation. As you know, Talon owns and operates nearly 11 gigawatts of generation, including nuclear, coal, and natural gas in Pennsylvania, and we are the largest owner of power generation in the Commonwealth. My comments center around building dispatchable generation, specifically gas. While Talon supports an all-of-the-above approach, a 21st century grid will need more natural gas facilities working alongside renewables, nuclear, energy storage, and more. A transition that solely replaces reliable dispatchable resources with weather-dependent resources is simply incompatible with a reliable and affordable power system. But Pennsylvania is well positioned to lead, and successfully developing new gas-fired generation ensures not just reliability and cost-effective power, but that the Commonwealth can attract its share of the industrial and data center power demand. Access to affordable Marcellus gas, along with the gas transportation infrastructure, is a significant competitive advantage for Pennsylvania. It sounds familiar, it's because Pennsylvania's been here before. They've done it before. Since restructuring, over 20 gigawatts of new gas generation has been built, nearly 11 gigawatts in the last 10 years. But look, significant challenges are facing the next gas build cycle versus the last one, not the least of which is the high bar for investors to underwrite the construction of new gas generation. To be frank, investors did not fare well in the last gas build cycle, and they believe that the changing PJM capacity market rules and resulting prices were partly to blame, a situation that continues to present itself. To add to the challenge, the cost of new equipment and construction has increased by 50%, and development and bringing to COD could now take 6 years. The cost of financing is higher, so despite the increased capacity clearing prices in the last PJM auction, investors have healthy skepticism. That said, the IPP space is ready to respond with the investment risk on their shoulders, not customers. Pennsylvania is ready to respond. It has its inherent advantages and a supportive siting, permitting, and state regulatory environment. But what is missing is consistent and longer-term new build price signals. It's important to add to this discussion that what has exacerbated our regional reliability challenges is the wave of retirements, arguably prematurely. As we think about ways to incentivize new gas generation, we should not at the same time embrace policies that accelerate the unnecessary shutdown of existing units. And frankly, we should encourage our neighboring states to avoid doing the same. Talon is a supporter of competitive markets and believes the PJM capacity market is still the best avenue to incent gas new build versus using out-of-market or state subsidies. However, there needs to be a recognition that the time frame for the auction and the inconsistency of the auction rules do not inspire investors to underwrite new gas construction. We look forward to the discussion today and ways to alleviate these concerns, increase investor conviction, and start building in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Liz Robinson?
Good morning, and thank you very much for holding these hearings. This is a very important subject, and really appreciate the time. I'm Liz Robinson. I direct the Philadelphia Solar Energy Association. We're principally an education-based organization, do a lot of public education advocacy around solar to dispel many of the myths around solar energy. And my comments really are going to focus on...
Is your mic on?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. My comments are going to focus on short and medium-term recommendations that the Commission can take to really address the price impacts that are going to come from high capacity prices. And frankly, the economic damage that will ensue across the Commonwealth. So I'm really focused on the distribution level, and I'll just review some of these to open the conversation a bit wider. Requiring utilities to include long-term contracts for zero-emission renewable energy in their default supply procurement plans is one recommendation. The second, to require utilities to incorporate storage in default supply. Third is to increase demand response among both commercial and residential customers. This is something the Commission can do through Act 129. The fourth is to increase certainty and diversity of customers for new generation applications, and in this align to approve community choice aggregation, a decision that can be made in the very short term. Fifth is to increase the amount of energy efficiency savings utilities achieve under Act 129. Again, this is something in the Commission's control. Sixth is to require EDCs to conduct integrated distribution planning. This is a recommendation made by the OCA 4 years ago. And in order for Pennsylvania utilities to really accommodate all of the distributed energy resources and DERAs that are needed, it is essential that we have integrated distribution planning in Pennsylvania. Related to that, the next step is to harness, coordinate, and deploy distributed energy resources, both DERs and DERAs. There was a lot of discussion about this in the previous session. This is critically important because this will continue to put downward pressure on rates for all Pennsylvanians. Eighth is to improve and update interconnection regulations. Interconnection at the distribution level doesn't get the same attention that interconnection queue at PJM, but the problems are legion in interconnection issues, and there are many, many very simple, direct, and immediate steps that can be taken to bring much more solar on the grid at the distribution level in Pennsylvania.
Liz,
Yes.
these are introductions. Sorry to interrupt you. We'll
That's
come back
okay.
to you, I promise.
That's okay.
I
All right.
promise. All right. Sam Robinson from the Governor's Office.
Thank you very much to the PUC for having me here. Really appreciate the forum and the conversation that you're encouraging. Sam Robinson, I'm Deputy Chief of Staff in Governor Shapiro's office, working on energy environmental issues. I have been working in this space in the Governor's office for just shy of a decade at this point through the last administration, and it is really fascinating to see that the amount of conversation that's being driven since July. I think since the PJM auction in last July, more conversation related to PJM, related to these reliability issues than in the first 9.5 years of my time in office here, working with the governor. And really, the challenge is framed for all of us in an extremely sort of polarized political space with the cross currents of climate consciousness, cost consciousness, all of the different sort of tensions that have made it difficult to move in our sort of energy vision in Pennsylvania over the last decade are really now coming to a head as we see supply diminishing, we see demand increasing significantly from data centers, from electrification, from all of these different forces. And I also work for a governor who I am contractually required to say in every public appearance is a GSD governor. He likes to get stuff done and is always pushing staff to make progress. So as we confront this issue shortly after the PJM auction, we began to engage with PJM. I see PJM's represented here in the room. and have done that pretty regularly, pretty actively. So there's obviously the capacity side, which is creating price signals, which we think is a good thing, although we have some anxiety about how high they have gone and how high they may go in the future. But really the thing that I sort of for this panel wanted to focus on is what we see as the steps and the pieces that the state can play, the role that we can play as state government in addressing these challenges that have led to high capacity prices and concerns about reliability. And I think you're hearing pieces of this in the panel today, but really see there being 6 that are sort of, to some extent or another, within the state's ability to address. Joe mentioned regulatory uncertainty and overhang. There's obviously, both at the federal level and at the state level, there have been regulatory approaches that may create some level of risk. Interconnection queue issues, huge challenge that PJM has been working on. They have proposals for additional steps with a fast track process that we've been strongly supportive of in the governor's office, but more clearly needs to be done there. Supply chain issues, this is probably the one that we have maybe the most challenge in addressing at the state level, because this is a global problem, people trying to find solar panels, find generating assets, turbines, and all of these things. Permitting delays, closer to home. There are certainly in some projects permitting issues, delays that can result in projects not being able to be financed, creating uncertainty that makes it challenging. Siting uncertainty. It seems like every project you hear about these days has some group that may not support it being in their backyard. Creates a lot of uncertainty for people trying to site projects. And then I think, to a certain extent, the pad readiness of sites, some of the types of infrastructure that people are trying to site in Pennsylvania, you really need kind of a well-situated access to certain types of infrastructure. Before I get cut off get the hook from the vice chair here, I'll suspend. But we have, and we can talk about it in the panel, we have pieces of either legislation or policy that we're prepared we've been developing and look forward to working on with the General Assembly in next legislative session that I think meet each of these 6 challenges. And, I think we need to find balance. In a state like Pennsylvania, you have to find balance in order to get anything done. And my governor, my boss, is certainly very interested in getting some of that stuff done.
Okay, thank you. Robert, NRDC.
Thank you, Vice Chair Barrow. And I want to thank all the commissioners and their staff for this opportunity and for their focus and attention on this multifaceted issue. You heard from my colleague, Tom Ratigliano, in session 1. My name is Robert Ruth. I serve as Pennsylvania Policy Director for NRDC's Climate and Energy Department. NRDC is a nonprofit whose lawyers, scientists, and other environmental specialists have worked since 1970 across the U.S. and internationally to protect our natural resources, public health, and climate. Pennsylvania is a priority for NRDC. We've engaged consistently on state policy here for over a decade now to ensure a cleaner, more affordable economy for all. I'm based in Pennsylvania, and I work to advance decarbonization efforts across all 67 counties, with most of my attention paid to statewide efforts here in Harrisburg. So deploying carbon-free generation at scale is critical to mitigating the impacts of climate change and to addressing the resource adequacy needs that we face this decade. Over the past several years, the barriers to that deployment have shifted from technical and economic in nature to social and institutional barriers, particularly at the state and local level. We have over 2,500 individual municipalities here, each of which have autonomy in governing subdivision and land use development ordinances, zoning and permitting requirements. I want to focus on the predominant resource currently in the PJM queue. So my understanding is that at the moment, only 5% of Pennsylvania municipalities have ordinances in effect that regulate grid-scale solar development. And these ordinances vary considerably. Developers of these resources must often make significant upfront investments in their projects at the local zoning approval stage. So, for example, developers will pay for expert testimony across a range of areas such as stormwater runoff, glare, property values, etc., during occasionally a dozen conditional use hearings to demonstrate compliance with often vague requirements that, again, are disparate across jurisdictions. And these issues are often exacerbated by lengthy interconnection queue delays. I'm not going to be here today offering prescriptive recommendations, but at a high level, establishing clearer, more consistent permitting review timelines and criteria would allow for better informed decisions and more efficient project completion. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you all. And as we go along, just raise your name card if you want to respond to another panelist or if you have something to say. So let's start with what I think is a softball. So what sorts of non-interconnection, so non-PJMQ, non-market barriers exist to bringing resources online? We'll get to the queue, right? But let's look outside of the queue. What is it that we're missing that's holding things up? Anyone?
Commissioner, I'll start. I mean, if you take the market mechanism out and you take the interconnection queue out, it's the time frame and the cost. I mean, we heard someone say earlier supply chain issues. That has elongated probably from 4 years now to 6 years. If you go from the last build cycle to the new build cycle, that's how much longer it takes to build. So the cost of it, partly because of that elongated development and construction process, is up roughly 50%. So think about a traditional combined cycle used to be $1 billion, it's now $1.5 billion. And the spend profile, the milestone payments, are now much earlier in the process because the EPC contractors and the OEMs, the manufacturers of the turbines, are asking for money earlier in the process, and the OEMs are not willing to take the risks that they took, which they call wrapping the project, which is they're guaranteeing performance and a delivery date.
What are OEMs?
Original equipment manufacturers, sorry.
Thank you.
But and the construction firms, right, that would say, we will basically serve as the general contractor and we'll wrap the risk. And it comes with a cost, but their willingness to do that in this new environment, in this much more costly environment, is reducing, and they're asking the developer to take on that risk. And so and financing, interest rates are up and financing costs are up, insurance costs are up. I mean, so all of these factors, when piled onto one another, I think it is a mistake to look at the last, I know I mentioned it in my comments, but to look at the last build cycle and say, we've done it and we can do it again. Because a 3-year outlook on capacity, it's not the same as it was 10 years ago as it is now, because the risks are higher, the developer risk is higher, and the cost up front is higher in all of the costs that I mentioned. So I know that's a bunch to pile on, but that is not an insignificant consideration, right?
So with the OEMs, where are they located? In the US, abroad? Do they have the capacity
It's a great
to meet the forecast that we see?
It's a great question, and without betraying confidentiality agreements, and we are talking to the OEMs, to the turbine manufacturers. There's other large equipment, major lead times, but they are largely made overseas, and they are being, there's only so much capacity. If you read the news, Vernova, GE being, probably the prominent one that people look at, but they are trying to increase the capacity to produce turbines. But if you started right now and you said, you know what, I'm just going to start putting milestone payments and getting in the queue, it is likely mid to late 28 before you can get something in your hands, before the construction of that last phase, which is another 12 to 18 months beyond that something could come online. So there is certainly an issue, and I would say that as time goes on and we don't get this right, you see there's plenty of other entities, utilities around the country who are getting in line on queues. It's obviously is a global queue, but it's one of the reasons we need to kind of get this right now and inspire the confidence for developers to start to put down the milestone payments. You're talking, tens of millions of dollars per turbine as you think about the outlay initially. But to do that, as time goes on, it's going to get even harder. That delivery date is going to move out even further.
Given those long wait times to get the actual equipment, what happens in the meantime while you're waiting? Are you constantly placing orders to kind of get ahead of that queue? And do the signals that you're getting from the capacity market, how does that play into your ordering behavior?
Right now, I think it's one of the reasons you don't see any new gas, any significant big new gas builds in the queue right now, because there isn't that visibility. So you can imagine if you're sitting here, just to play the question back to you, if you're sitting here now, and I said that the development construction process is going to take me until late 29 or 2030, and now, but yet we're having the discussion that we're having about PJM capacity rules, that's a big question mark, right? And I mean, how do you underwrite that based on fundamental forecasting is the best that you can do. And as Margie mentioned, investors, lenders, that's not the kind of bets that they would traditionally make. So there's certainly a lot of development and early construction work that is done leading up to the time that the major equipment is delivered. And then there's a last phase of commissioning that happens. But there's a lot of money to be spent. And so without a longer term capacity clear, you're hitting exactly on the point. If you said 2030 is when major new gas generation could come online, it is disconnected. I mean, there's an enormous kind of fundamental bet that investor or developer has to make of what the world's going to look like starting in 2030, and then continue for another 10 or 20 years. I'll just maybe add that I think there are two elements. There is what can we do over the next 5 years, and then what happens past, and maybe we'll come back to the near-term issues a little later.
Okay, Chairman DeFrank has a question, and then we'll go to, I think I saw Joe, EJ, and
So Darren,
Liz.
I just wanted to follow up on one of the things you said about the capacity auction and the market and the lack of consistency. I will say that over the last several rule changes, there have been significant rule changes. I do think, though, that market is going to be tinkered with from time to time. Not the whole-scale changes that we have seen in the last several changes. I just want to make a comment. But on timing, so what is the sweet spot? I mean, so 3 years isn't enough. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Because it seems to me as though when you have a market that's evolving like this, the longer out you go, the more risk you're bringing in.
Yeah.
So what's the sweet spot? Where 3 isn't enough, 10 may be too much. What is it then?
I think it is somewhere in the middle. It's a great question, and I think every developer and investor will have a slightly different view to that, and they'll tweak their returns accordingly. But the duration is matched up very aligned with their conviction that the rules are going to stay the same. And so my sense is that kind of 5 to 7 years gives a better, gives more comfort into the consistency of capacity prices. And look, I will say it was mentioned early in an earlier panel. I mean, if you look at the profitability of a new combined cycle plant, it's really 2/3 is coming from the energy market, energy margin, and only 1/3 from capacity. But the energy market is very projectable, right? So it's basically driven off of gas prices, right? So it's hedgeable, it's visible, there's a lot of consistency. I mean, there is risk, obviously. It's this, and I think Margie hit it right. You can make fundamental bets, but with uncertainty on the regulatory side, that will cause a level of concern that people will look elsewhere, I guess, to invest their money.
But isn't that the way the capacity market's designed? Is the price of the commodity goes up, the capacity payment goes down. So you want high commodity cost plus high capacity?
No, I say, but if you look at general research about what does it take normalized here, a combined cycle to support a new build. support new build. Put aside if you're contracted with a, with a hyperscaler, but you just ran the model out. That is likely a 300 plus. I mean, some people think lower, some people think higher. I'm talking steady state run rate, long-term for a 20 to 30-year investment that developer of $1.5 billion combined cycle is making. That number with normal energy margin, 2/3, 1/3, is something probably north of 300. Some people think it's closer to 400. Some people think it's slightly less than 300, but just a normalized capacity price. Now, I know it's subject to ELCC for combined cycles, which gets to another topic we were talking about before. But so $200, just to say it this way, Commissioner, if you saw capacity clears at $200, and that may satisfy existing generators, and they say we can limp along because we've been here and that can cover our fixed cost and the energy margin we see, that is not going to support new build generation.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I know everybody's concerned about reliability, and so are we, but I think, we had a good auction clearing price. We're hopeful that will continue. But the other thing we have to take stock of is, there's going to be a change of administration. We're going to have different Congress. We're going to have different administration as well. I see some changes likely occurring at the federal level that will have an impact here. You may see some rollbacks. I mean, clearly the 111 rules could be rolled back, maybe remanded back to the agency. I don't know if there's going to be changes in water effluent or fly ash consideration. So you might see a longer life with some of the coal plants, I think, than perhaps right now. I was at an event last week with the CEO from Vistra, and he talked about, that auction clearing price. They're reevaluating the retirement date for Miami Fort, which is a nominal 1,000 megawatt coal plant in Ohio. We've seen the Elgin announcement, the TMI restart, obviously a little bit of different circumstances there, but things will organically happen, but it does take time to build the plants. You're talking about pricing, and somebody pointed out to me the latest Dominion IRP. Their cost to build a combined cycle is $690 a megawatt day. That's in their IRP for a regulated combined cycle plant. Supply chain issues are there for sure. As was pointed out, you have to write some big checks to take a queue position right now to get a gas turbine, to get a breaker, to get the transformers and so forth. And there's a lot of draw right now for this equipment into the Middle East. And so we're competing with the big draw to the Middle East right now as well. But I think you can get gas turbine deliveries by, 2027, certainly 2028. Again, you got to write some big checks, which again differentiates a company like Calpine because we have 27,000 megawatts, 78 facilities. We have well-established relationships with OEMs and EPC contractors as well. So I think, everybody comes at it a little bit differently. We are afforded an advantage because of that. Others probably have similar advantages. So I don't think it's doom and gloom. I think we're going to see some existing power plants extend. I think we'll catch up with this in building. I think clearly the 2030 timeframe is important. I know you mentioned RRI. We think that can help. There was a bill introduced by Troy Balderson. I forget what it's called here. GRID, the Guaranteeing Reliability Through the Interconnection Dispatchable Power Act. Now, clearly that will have to be reintroduced next year. That would be probably a follow-on to what PJM envisions to be, RRI, which would be a federally mandated acceleration of resources that provide reliability benefit. Clearly with this Congress, incoming Congress with the presidency, maybe that has a shot of going through. So that'll be important. But, I'd say there's three things here that come to mind for me in Pennsylvania. One is the RGGI piece, which I mentioned, which is a big cost that we would have to bear if we built a new plant, and, we're probably going to be cautious on that. The second one is interconnection we talked about. The third one is permitting. And, I know the governor came out with his executive order, and that's great, and that'll probably help streamline a few things here and there, but I'm going to read this because it's well and concise. Getting environmental permits is not the issue in Pennsylvania. DEP works with the applicant to move the permitting process along. Importantly, the application review process can be controlled to a significant extent by the applicant submitting a complete and high-quality application and responding quickly to DEP requests for additional information. The real issue is the litigation associated with the permit. So developing large-scale electric generating projects in Pennsylvania that can provide baseload supply is increasingly difficult. Since 2018, 9 new natural gas-fired plants of at least 500 megawatts have gone into operation in the Commonwealth, but the last one commenced operation in 2021. Since then, there has been at least 2 plants permitted, Allegheny Energy Center and Renovo Energy Center, but the projects were terminated before construction due in large part to third-party appeals of key environmental permits. The delays caused by the third-party appeals of environmental permits can be fatal to a project due to the inability of the project developer to retain or arrange financing while the permit appeals are pending. The de novo review of the Environmental Hearing Board allows appellates to demand large volumes of discovery. In many cases, applicants' discovery requests go far beyond the information considered by the agency in granting the permit. A third-party appeal of an environmental permit could add years of delay to a project, creating uncertainty about the project, would make it extraordinarily difficult for a developer to secure or retain the large financing needs for the facility. So I think that is one of the other key areas that has to be addressed. So I'd say again, RGGI, interconnection, and permitting, but permitting from that perspective. So,
Thank you. EJ.
Yeah, I just got to touch on what Joseph just said about the permitting. I think the 2 major issues I run into when I'm presenting a new project to an area is the lack of information that the local authorities and some of the state level folks have on the technology and the way that it works, but also on the economic benefits and the tax revenue that comes with these projects as well. So I think that that's, a big thing that can be communicated with some of these local authorities. And in addition to that, the permitting, the ordinances, it typically takes, I worked in Bradford County last year, and it took us about 11 months to finally get an ordinance draft through after many revisions. And a lot of it just comes through the fact that a lot of these local electeds, they don't know anything about this stuff because it's brand new technology to them. And for them to spend a lot of time, in a 2-hour session once a month to do this, it's just putting a lot on their plate. So I think, maybe some support in regards to communicating the benefits of these projects, but maybe some sort of guidance in regards to, here's a template, or here's here's an example of what you could do, and here's what's going to happen if you do it. Because they're spending a lot of money, at the local level for their solicitors to handle a lot of this stuff, and then it's also holding up a lot of our projects because we're waiting on these ordinances, and it seems like every month the meeting will just get tabled till the next month, and it's kind of a repeating cause.
When you say guidance, from who to who?
So I think guidance would be for both the local elected officials, but then also for the potential landowners. A lot of the times what we're running into is we lease a lot of our land to farmers. A lot of times there will be a lot of farmers that are retiring. And some folks, they're not aware of the financial impact that we can have on their estate, once they sign up with a project like ours. So an example would be Clean and Green here in Pennsylvania. We have a lot of landowners that are registered in the Clean and Green program here, and there's a stipulation that if you withdraw from that program, you have to pay a penalty, X amount of dollars based on X amount. So for a lot of them, they think that that's something they're going to have to incur from day one, that they'll have to pay that. They don't know that some developers will cover those costs. We specifically, Vesper, will cover that cost. So I think, more communication, more education with the local electeds, but then also with the regular public in general. I always say that our industry, we lack a Got Milk campaign. We don't have really a voice or a message for the solar and utility scale industry, and I think that's something that stakeholders all around can help develop.
Before we move on, I just wanted to clarify, I'm hearing some of the local barriers for some of these projects, but from a state perspective, there was no shortage of incentive programs or focus or prioritization. I can tell you for that Renovo project specifically, I personally wrote the tax incentive package for the Commonwealth to help locate that project here. So from a state perspective, there was an absolute appreciation for the economic development of those projects. So I just want to clarify that.
Just to touch back on that, I would say that in my experience, I've run into a handful of local elected officials, state elected officials who this is their first experience running into developers with me. So I think there's a benefit to having a wide range conversation with this across both parties.
All right, next up is Liz Robinson.
Yeah, I just want to build on those comments first to say that a model ordinance would be very helpful, and there have been model ordinances written but not officially promulgated by the state. And that's critically important because the education of one landowner at a time is an extraordinary burden. So model ordinances, much better promulgation of that through state channels, both the Commission, DEP, other entities that are engaged. And then related to this, frankly, I'll just take a step back to say all the polling that we've done over the years has shown that solar is, in fact, Pennsylvania's preferred resource. More Pennsylvanians want solar than any other energy resource. And the state, frankly, not to criticize anybody, but the state has not yet adopted the policies that reflect that. So we have a long way to go to catch up to what the public is demanding in Pennsylvania. So one project really is community choice aggregation. This is a tool that has been in wide use across the country and is critically, is very responsive to local demand. And in Pennsylvania, we have the opportunity to increase the opportunities to provide firm off-takers of supply. And this is one of those ways that could be done. Thank you.
All right. Katie? Yeah. Sorry, I want to take us back to that question of where's the supply chain coming from, domestic or international. And so I would highlight at NEI, we have over a dozen new nuclear technology designers, including some world-leading nuclear energy suppliers like Westinghouse, which has a home right here in Pennsylvania. And it's not just the reactor designs themselves, but it's everything that goes into building those plants. And as highlighted in a 2017 report by the Energy Futures Initiative, Pennsylvania hosts 71 companies in the nuclear energy supply chain. So one of the benefits of nuclear, whether it's preserving the existing fleet, uprating, or considering new nuclear development, is that a large portion of that supply chain can be right here at home in the U.S.
Thank you. Sam?
So to start out, I wanted to thank Joe for his kind words about DEP. I think that agency is often much maligned, and there are a lot of really good people doing hard work there. And to an absolutely correct point that he made, if the permits come in flawlessly and high quality, they can turn them around very quickly where that's appropriate, obviously. I do think that part of the narrative around Renovo and around Allegheny Energy Center, not to get into it too deeply, but those were the last projects in the door, and so I think part of what happened is that their financing sort of collapsed as there wasn't capacity prices really to support it. But it does get to the broader point that we do have, there is significant litigation risk, I think, subsequent to permits being issued. I don't know quite what the solution to that is. I mean, it's something that we think about. I think as we look at permitting, we're really trying to control the state's process of it, but more maybe to discuss there. I do think also that this sort of patchwork of siting authorities is a challenge, also a controversial one to cite. We're a local control state, a sort of small box state that makes it challenging to cite, but I think that there's probably more that can be done there as well. This is something that we've put some thought into. Other states have authorities that help with this. In some instances, Ohio has one. So maybe bringing at least some additional technical expertise could be something that that would be fruitful. I wanted to ask one sort of question of the panel, if I could, which is, as I sort of framed my 5 or 6 barriers, and actually I think the EPC comment that you made, workforce is becoming increasingly a challenge. People can't, you maybe can't get the supply, the the supply chain issues and things ordered, but increasingly more difficult to even find EPCs. We're hearing about that as well. So yet another barrier to think about how to address. But we've been focused more on these sort of, okay, assuming you can figure out your financing because the capacity market is now providing greater costs, less need for, sort of the state should focus itself on the other side. And Senator Yaw, in particular, had a financing piece of legislation that he put out. My sense from the folks that we spoke to were that it didn't feel like that was exactly the right solution, but I'm curious the extent that there is need for that, be it loan guarantees, be it some sort of additional tax credit. Is that need there to de-risk some of the financing? I've sort of assumed capacity price is high as far as the eye can see. In all likelihood, that means that it's easier to make those decisions. But is there a role that the state could play in the financing side?
I would like to think that the market would provide the level of visibility and certainty that banks, which just to be clear, banks lending to power plants right now, I mean, they get a lot of the trend, right, and they're willing to underwrite to a certain level. Prices are up, but they're willing. It's not like it's an on-off switch, and so. I think the market giving visibility is the right answer versus kind of subsidies for some and not for others. But I'd also say that especially when you look at the spend profile of a development. So and maybe this is less so for Calpine or a Talon, but recall the last build phase. It wasn't the Calpines and the Talons. It was the CPVs and the Pandas and so forth, right? And they come at it in a very different way, right? With a very narrow view on equity returns and how much leverage they could get through the process. So I think the lender depth is there. Again, a little more costly. Those equity returns are really what's under pressure, and it comes earlier in the process, as I was saying before. So that's a long way of saying, it might be nice, but I would like to think that we could get the market to give the appropriate signals and let the Calpines and Talons and others, small developers, big developers of the world, to go and let the competitive forces take over and build.
All right, Joe.
Yeah, if I can add, just to correct the record, we did build 2 new combined cycle plants in that last wave. We built Garrison in Delaware. We built the second unit at York. So we did build combined cycles in that last wave. A lot of respect for Senator Yaw and certainly adding to the discussion. I think it's an interesting thing to tee up. We did not support that in Texas. Calpine did not, and most of the other generators did not as well. Texas had the unique advantage of having, I think, a $20 billion surplus. But what's different in Texas versus PJM is there's no capacity market in Texas. That makes it fundamentally different, I think. Clearly the government was concerned, I think, out there, maybe rightfully so. They did have Uri. That was significant. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Virginia might be ground zero for data centers, number 1. I think Ohio's number 3. I think Texas might be number 2. So tremendous load growth, not only from that, from other industry as well. But, we are building in Texas. We started that before this fund idea came out. We're certainly looking at that. I'm not sure exactly where that stands at this point in time, but I think we're going to build regardless, if I'm not mistaken. But, don't hold me to that. But, I think that is fundamentally different. The one thing I would suggest here is that we need to think about this not as the glass is half empty, the glass is half full. This is a tremendous economic opportunity for the Commonwealth. Tremendous. We sit on huge gas reserves. We have great, well-trained building trades labor. They'd be chomping at the bit to build 10,000 megawatts of gas plants that we don't need in Pennsylvania, but is needed within the broader PJM. If you look at where we are today, I just looked a little bit ago. Pennsylvania was exporting over 10,000 megawatts of power within PJM. I don't think that takes into consideration the power flows into New York, and New York relies a lot on Pennsylvania, by the way. The other states that were exporting into PJM, North Carolina, West Virginia, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, 4,400 megawatts. Illinois, all the nuclear plants, right? But there's about 9,000 megawatts of gas turbines, peakers that retire in 2030 unless there's a change of law. So that'll change quickly. The states that are importing, Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey, Delaware, DC. I mean, you can see the shift here. The more traditional, maybe Republican leaning, I don't know what the right answer is, versus the other really progressive states. They're the importers and we're the suppliers. So, but it's a huge economic opportunity.
So, Joe, one of the things you said was you guys did build in other states. Where? So how much capacity have you built in the last 5 years, 10 years?
Well, I can't speak to what we built in California or Texas, and certainly we acquire as well, but we do have a history of building.
What about PJM footprint?
In PJM, Garrison and York, maybe 11, 12 megawatts.
And I guess that's my question is, you cited Reggie as the reason for not building, yet you built in a Reggie state and you built in a state in Pennsylvania that was considering Reggie. So I'm just questioning.
When we built in Delaware, Reggie was nothing like it is today. I mean, Reggie was probably in that $4 range, if you will. Now it's 25. I mean, it's magnitude difference. I'm sorry. Turn the mic on. Apologize.
Okay, so
I mean, we bought the assets from Connective, right? They were already in Reggie. We knew that. But again, Reggie was a shadow of what it is today. I mean, today it's so material, it's unbelievable.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm probably going to kick myself for going down this pathway, but what is a state to do? Because you pay for a problem now or you pay for cleanup afterward, and that's what I think of. That's how I think of Reggie, trying to get ahead of these increasingly costly climate events that we're having. The cleanup is really expensive when things happen. I look at what happened to Texas with Uri. They're gonna keep coming. So where do we invest the money to get ahead of that?
Well, a little frame of reference. So Calpine is a huge supporter of a price on carbon. It just has to be done in the right way, right? So national level, perfect sense. Market level, we can live with that, but recognize there still will be leakage coming in from the west into PJM and from the south into PJM, but it's more manageable if it's a broad market-wide approach. I think you got to recognize that the power plants that we need, they will get built. It's just a question of where they get built. If this Reggie thing hangs open, you're going to see a lot more activity to the west in Ohio and West Virginia, maybe Indiana. I know there's the St. Joseph's plant in Indiana. I think there's another one that's being developed right now as well. So they're going to get built, and that environmental impact is going to be there. It's just going to flow into Pennsylvania as opposed to occur in Pennsylvania. If Pennsylvania can get together with the other states and do a Reggie PJM-wide approach or something like that, we can support that. It's just, right now, the rising tide has to lift all boats, not just selected boats. So it's just, it's just fundamental economics. Why would you take on that cost if you don't have to take it out elsewhere? Now, what I wonder about, though, is if you're building all these plants in West Virginia and Ohio, I guess you're going to be having to build the transmission system to sort of move that power too, right? So maybe that's a more expensive solution. And clearly there's tremendous load growth in Ohio. And they are equally concerned about reliability. They're equally concerned about economic development. They don't want to forestall that. But they also see the opportunity to build these plants as a huge economic opportunity. So it's kind of a twofold thing for them.
Okay, thank you.
So one other follow-up on that, and that was when we were talking about the yaw bill. So the fact we have capacity market in PJM, there's not a reason for sort of a state subsidy or a pot of money to assist in generation. I'm asking.
I think so, generally, just off the cuff, so to speak. But again, I point to the fact that Texas had a $20 billion budget surplus. I don't think we're anywhere in that camp in Pennsylvania, right? So It's a question of, go to the cupboard, is there anything in the cupboard, right? So,
Commissioner, I would just add that in Texas, that they are taking Texas funds and supporting Texas only, right? Here, to Joe's point, is this would be taking, Texas taxpayer funds and supporting development that is essentially shoring up shortfalls in other states. That's a difficult one to wrap your mind around, I think.
yeah, if I could add, pointing that out, I think that's a really good thing because, again, pointing to the fact that we got exporting 10,206 megawatts, within the last hour, I think it's somewhere between a 16 to 18 gigawatt surplus, right? The issue is not here. The issue is in Maryland, West Virginia, New Jersey, Delaware, DC, obviously PA's in the broader PJM. So I think PA needs to look at this as not, we got to burden our ratepayers with anything. This is an economic development opportunity for the Pennsylvania largely to feed that load outside of Pennsylvania. You would never put that burden onto the Pennsylvania ratepayer.
Didn't the last
How would you do a
auction,
prudency review?
but didn't that last auction show that when you had the locational price in Maryland was what, 4 something, I think, right?
Yeah,
Did that take that into account?
Yeah, and at the same time, by the way, the governor's trying to encourage data center development in Maryland. They don't have enough power in the state to begin with, and they're encouraging data center development in the state. I mean, it's, somebody's got to get their thoughts together regarding a comprehensive energy plan within the state. And clearly, it's about wires coming in from Pennsylvania to feed the load there, because it's going to be hard to develop anything in Maryland. It's just the fact. And then, of course, you got the Reggie thing there as well. So.
All right, Liz?
So I was, apologies, going to return to a remark made by EJ earlier. So can perhaps revisit that later. I'll just note for now, there have been years and years worth of rhetoric about the risks of generation and emissions leakage posed by Pennsylvania participation in RGGI. So I don't want to revisit those discussions here, but we'll just note, to Governor Shapiro's credit, upon taking office, he convened a RGGI working group, brought together a diverse group of stakeholders with wildly differing perspectives on the policy merits of RGGI, environmental stakeholders, consumer advocates, organized labor, energy industry representatives. They all reached, frankly, a historic consensus that a cap and invest program for the electric sector that generates revenue to support the ongoing energy transition in Pennsylvania is the optimal approach. So there are plans out there consistent with that RGGI working group's recommendations. My remarks about EJ and how he framed the sort of lack of awareness and education at the municipal level from local officials whose plates are already full. I guess I'll just quickly say, highlight existing work happening at DEP and a promising opportunity to scale that work up. DEP received from DOE in the last few months a nearly $2 million grant through the RSTEP program. That's renewable siting through technical engagement and planning. So to provide Pennsylvania-specific education and outreach materials to municipal officials, county-level officials. My understanding is these aren't intended to be promotional for grid-scale solar, but simply to provide a level of baseline education about what grid-scale solar panels are, what they aren't, engineering and siting questions that would be relevant for local decision makers. So I understand that DEP has been engaged in this work since 2021 with an investment of just under $300,000 thus far. They've conducted 26 listening sessions. Anyway, with this $2 million grant, I believe there's a 3-year period of performance. They will be able to continue to do outreach to raise awareness because, as I mentioned in my intro, I believe only 5% of Pennsylvania's municipalities currently have ordinances to regulate the development of grid-scale solar. So appreciate you letting me bounce back to that.
Thank you. Thanks for that information as well. Liz?
Yeah, I just wanted to address the issue of economic benefit for Pennsylvanians. All of the objective studies that have been done about RGGI and other forms of distributed generation resources improve the economic outlook for Pennsylvanians, much more so than new generation. So it is really, it's important to look at the evidence and the body of factual evidence rather than talking specifically about a single industry.
Okay, thank you. So, Joe, you touched on this, ERCOT. PJM's interconnection queue is, they're starting to fix it. Things are starting to move, we're getting new entrants. But when I look down at Texas, it seems like they are building and actually getting resources online quicker than us. Is it that $20 million? I mean, 20 bill, how much was it?
I'm sorry,
The surplus.
their budget surplus, $20
Yeah.
billion is my understanding. I am not an ERCOT expert, mind you, but recognize again that it's a single state
Yeah.
RTO. There's a little bit of it outside of ERCOT, but generally, and it's pretty homogeneous. You know what I mean? You're not dealing with a lot of the issues that PJM is dealing with. And I spent 5 years at PJM, right? I was the guy responsible for renewables at one point, both operations and markets at one point. Interconnection's complex, and you just can't willy-nilly plug in. I mean, with all due respect, it takes time for a reason. The real question is, how do you prioritize what goes through that queue? And I think the RRI thing is an attempt to say, hey, we've got to prioritize resources that bring us reliability attributes. The Troy Balderson legislation is going to perhaps take it even further, in that direction. I mean, I don't know. PJM says there's 200,000 megawatts of mostly renewables in the queue. What does that look like next year when we see changes within the administration regarding IRA funding? We're already hearing about the ability for them to leverage impoundments and so forth. Clearly, the president-elect has made no secrets. He thinks, wind turbines are problematic. I don't know what's going to happen to the offshore wind, New Jersey and Maryland. I mean, Virginia's a little bit different maybe because, they've got a rate base to dump all the costs on, basically. I don't know what happens to solar and so forth, or storage, or whatever anybody else was depending upon from an IRA funding perspective, but I don't know if we're going to see changes, but it just seems likely that it could occur. And I think at some point PJM will have to digest, because I keep hearing, and I don't know what the numbers are, 10% yield out of the queue generally. It's like, so 200,000 megawatts is a 20% yield. Then you apply ELCC accreditation, and that number drops tremendously. So I think it's a question of how do you prioritize what you need? I mean, you want to be fair and open and equitable, but then you got to recognize the reality that we heard about from Diana and NERC. I mean, now is the time to listen to NERC, in my opinion. Not that it's always not the time. It's always the time to listen to NERC, but even more so now is going to be the time. And then we're going to see some, think about it. The administration is going to be going in one direction, and I don't know what some of the really progressive states are going to do in response to that. But, and PJM is going to have to deal with all of that. So, we'll see next year. I probably just buckle up.
Markets are about supply and demand, and obviously with the data center load and AI growth and growth in manufacturing, the demand is there. Are the generators, what I think I'm hearing from you, Joe, especially, is that y'all are willing to build, you're ready to build, you know how to build. It's going to be about where you build. That's it?
Yeah. I think that's right, yeah.
Okay. Same thing from, is that what I'm hearing from Talon as well?
Well, we're pretty committed to Pennsylvania. It's where our assets are for the most part. It's where our focus is. Obviously, there's a lot going on, with it. So when our first, second, third priority is looking at Pennsylvania and PJM MAC and PPL zone efforts to add generation.
Okay.
Let me just add that we're not necessarily opposed to Pennsylvania. It's just navigating this issue at this point in time for us. I mean, obviously, Pennsylvania is our third largest state in terms of generation. I think it's our third largest state in terms of our competitive retail C&I load. So Pennsylvania is a very, very strategic state for us. It's just how do we navigate this particular issue that's on the table.
Katie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, of course, every state is different, but we do see many examples from other states seeking to support new nuclear development, clean energy development, and that could be through examining their general regulatory structures or considering their state permitting efficiencies. But really, they're all pursuing this because they see the benefits of not only the reliability, but those economic benefits being brought locally.
What are you seeing nationally with the nuclear fleet? So eventually, we're going to hit the wall where the licenses for the already constructed units can't be extended anymore. At some point, we're going to run out of extensions. At least I hope so. I hope we're not going to run them until they break. Will they be replaced with small modular, or do you think they could be replaced with large scale nuclear?
So those are great questions. And first, I want to say we're absolutely not running anything until it breaks. We are thoughtfully replacing any piece part that is showing some age and needs to be replaced. So while many of our current fleet has hit that initial 40 years on their original license and has extended their license for another 20 years, so now they're licensed to 60, the plant itself is actually more like a teenager because those major components have been replaced, they have been maintained, they have been kept up to date. As part of establishing that extended license, they were required to put in place aging management programs. So we're good. After that 60 years, then on the first panel, Adrian made reference to subsequent license renewals. So those oldest plants are already looking at an additional license period to take them to 80 years. The way the process has been set up, the way that we're implementing those aging management programs, there's not necessarily any reason to believe why we have to stop at 80. But that being said, there does always come a time, even your favorite feature of your home or your favorite vehicle, it will need to be replaced. So what's going to replace or what's going to add to the current fleet? It could be large reactors. It could be small modular reactors. And particularly as we look in areas that have very dedicated needs for reliable heat and electricity, it could also be what we call micro reactors. So that's one of the really exciting things about nuclear technology today is that it's being developed in a variety of sizes with a variety of options so that whatever your resource need is, you can select a technology to match that and to provide exactly what you need.
All right.
I'll add if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been at this a long time. I actually began my career in nuclear. So I worked for Bechtel building Susquehanna 2. I then went to work for Bechtel again building Hope Creek. I then went to work for United Engineers building Seabrook. And then I came back to Philadelphia and worked for Pico Construction building Limerick 2. So I've been around nuclear a long time. I don't think the nuclear reactors, I can never envision them going away. I mean, they're always going to find a way to figure out how to extend things, or maybe material issues and so forth that you have to deal with. But, they're built. They're really, really expensive to build. So I think there's always going to be a way to figure out how to extend them. I don't see a future for the traditional nuclear power plants. All we have to do is look at Vogtle. It costs $37 billion for a 2,234 megawatt plant. I think those numbers are right, which equates to about $16,472 a kW. So, the ratepayers in Georgia are handling that basically, and I'm sure they're not terribly happy with that. I think there's a lot of promise with the small modular reactors, but probably in the 10 to 15 year range. I think it's great that the technology companies who can afford this are looking to support that. I will tell you that I've been at Calpine around 13 years. 2 years before that, I was talking to NewScale about joining them at one point, and that was 15 years ago. And NewScale, their first project just got canceled, I think, at this point. So I think there's a lot of promise there. The real issue is timing. And here again, I don't think you want to burden the ratepayer with a science project just yet. I think let the technology companies that want to do that, let them do that. That's probably the best approach.
Thank you. Sam?
I think I haven't been at this as long as Joe has, but sort of have the same unfortunate impression. Governor is very supportive of sort of this all of the above energy approach, and we're very hopeful that nuclear, sort of new modular reactors, new forms of reactors become a solution we can rely on, and sooner than later. I think it really holds a lot of promise, but challenging that it isn't. That future always seems to be a little further away than we would like. And we were, I will say, also very happy to support the Constellation's effort to restart TMI. Unfortunately, we only have one of those, but maybe there may be uprates or other sort of things that can be done to pull more out of the existing nuclear fleet. I'd also say, seems like there's some promise to putting modular reactors in, sort of on the premises of existing nuclear, which seems like it might be an easier permitting process and sort of have local acceptance. But, we always sort of in these conversations come back to natural gas new build, which is the challenging space. And I just wanted to say, as we're looking at how to confront this process, it really can't just be one type of technology. I think solar and particularly battery backup solar has an important role. Dr. Brian Regley, who's joined us today, is always talking about geothermal and the opportunities that can come from geothermal. There's more tools in this toolbox, and I guess I'd just add, although it's kind of another step beyond, but energy efficiency, coming back to sort of the least cost electron, which is an electron avoided to help solve some of the demand side problem. Is really something that I think as part of a more holistic package we need to continue to look at. But all of the above, as I said, and there's a lot of different resources. We just tend to focus on maybe the one that we've sort of most recently looked to the most significantly.
All right, Liz.
Yeah, I wanted actually to build on those thoughts. In the previous panel, there was a lot of discussion about the dangers of becoming over-reliant on a single source. And frankly, personally, I was delighted to see the extension of the existing nuclear power plants. It's critically important to keep clean energy in place as long as it's safe. So it's a really very positive development. But returning to, the other clean resources, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, Pennsylvania has a very strong track record of harvesting energy efficiency. It is a vast resource, and it is, in fact, the cheapest resource. So it is the most beneficial resource in the state and will remain so. And we have a very good law in place. Act 129 is an excellent foundation. We have just not been maximizing the benefits that Act 129 can bring. So in both demand response, which is a very, very cheap way to reduce cost, and in energy efficiency, we've got a lot more room. And the Commission controls that and can make that resource grow very dramatically in the next phase, which is coming up soon in 2025. And likewise, battery storage. The Commission has yet to require any minimum amount of battery storage. It's recognized as a distribution resource, yes, but it is not required. And frankly, a lot of the consideration of solar as a capacity resource, I was very glad to hear Dr. Bowering's discussion of hourly consideration rather than annual consideration for capacity resources. It's critically important to look at all resources. And when you myopically and frankly arbitrarily look only at a very narrow slice of the resource mix, you're just really limiting yourself. So it's critically important, and my last point, which is usually my first point, is Pennsylvania needs to do much better planning. This is a complicated situation where it's becoming increasingly complicated every year as climate change bears down. The cost considerations are not easy, and it's critically important that Pennsylvania do rigorous and comprehensive planning. And that's why, one of my recommendations is to require all the EDCs to do integrated distribution planning. At minimum, that's very essential. And that kind of, you can't get to where you need to go if you don't have a plan. And we don't have a plan in Pennsylvania. We do not. We react to one, situation at a time where it's a knee-jerk reaction. And frankly, it does everyone a disservice. You're adding cost unnecessarily. So it's really critical to do much better and much more comprehensive planning. And let the facts guide you. Have rigorous, factual, not people presenting their case or their position, but presenting facts. That's what we need.
Thank you. I can't argue with a plan. I cannot.
Hard to argue with a plan.
My last question.
I have a story, if you don't mind, indulge me.
Okay.
Because, we're hearing this chatter about utilities wanting to do and so forth, Ohio, a little bit in Pennsylvania and all that, but I got a really good Calpine story here. So in early 2001, we began development of a combined cycle gas plant in Louisiana, and that's because the state was moving towards deregulation. The project was 95% complete, and the state decided not to pursue deregulation. So the site sat dormant for 20 years, 95% complete plant, dormant for 20 years. Entergy was looking for new generation. Of course, they wanted to build it with rate base. We ended up working with community partners and supportive regulators and reached an agreement with them that we would tear down the existing facility. The deal required and we would build a new one. That not $1 ratepayer funds would be spent on the project until it was fully operational and met testing parameters. However, in the case of a PPA, they're not going to make any money on PPA. So we ended up doing a build, own, transfer to them, essentially. So they took control of the project from us. The story here is that we delivered on time, and that our cost to deliver it was $725 a kW. It tested perfectly. The plant runs great. It's one of their strongest performing plants. Currently, the Entergy, and this was within the last couple of years, currently Entergy's, in their latest IRP filing, is looking for $1,600 a kW for a new combined cycle plant. We built it for $725, turned it over to them. They now want $1,600 a kW to build a similar plant. That's a perfect illustration of how competition and companies that know how to do this can actually deliver things cost effectively. So thank you for indulging me.
Okay. Well, I'll follow up with a question on that, because something there didn't make sense. It was 95% built?
I'm sorry? Yes, and believe me, I wasn't involved with it, so I'm relying upon my colleague who was, but that's the story. So.
Okay. All right. So right now in PJM, our interconnection queue is largely intermittent resources, and for reliability's sake, it does need to be paired up with non-intermittent resources, and because we sit on the Marcellus Shale, that's going to be natural gas the way I see it. Do we have sufficient natural gas transmission in this region, in this state? Does anyone have any opinions on that?
I couldn't go deep on it, but there is additional pipeline infrastructure that will be needed. It's not just running laterals off of the existing interstate pipelines. But, again, tip of the hat to Pennsylvania and the inherent advantages it has. I mean, siting, permitting, and laying new pipe on existing easements and so forth is something that is a well-worn path in Pennsylvania. And I think as we look at and evaluate new build or additional generation opportunities and look at the gas needs, it's all able to be done within the time frame of building the gas plant itself. So a long way of saying there is enough gas in the ground It will require additional infrastructure, and I don't think that'll be the long lead time issue, given the track record.
Thank you. Joe?
And again, I'm not an expert here either, but my understanding is there's certain parts of the states where there's more restrictions than others, but there's other areas which are pretty decent, but there could be lateral requirements and so forth as well. There's also the ability to sort of cite some projects around where some of the gas production is as well. So there's ways to navigate that, I think, as well. So.
All right. Any other questions? Katie?
So we heard in the previous panel an analogy about this wobbly stool, right? Trying to balance all the things when we're talking about like environmental concerns, affordability, reliability. But if we're talking about new builds, how do we balance the adequacy with environmental and sustainability goals? So we all admit we're going to need new infrastructure. I heard some folks admit that we want to meet our climate goals and still meet economic development goals. How do we balance it?
If I may. Well, so I think through the extremely complex political process that we have here in Pennsylvania, the governor likes to say, only governor in the nation with a divided legislature. We're headed into a next session with a similarly divided legislature. And so, the things that can get done have to some extent, find a middle path that is a compromise. And certainly the Utility Commission has, you need 3 votes to get anything done. You have extraordinary powers. I think there are some good suggestions that were even brought up here today as to things you could look at for a piece of that. But I think we sort of all recognize that we need, in response to this moment, to go a little further and find some more of those compromises at the legislature. I hesitate whether to say this, but the governor, as much as he likes to sort of lament the fact that he has a divided legislature, he should see how it is when you have no chambers in that body. But in either case, having divided government really gives an opportunity to find common grounds, things that the chambers can trade, and so we look forward to trying to do that next session. And I'll just end with an ask from our perspective. We obviously don't have a monopoly on good ideas. We think we've identified a number of the barriers and have solutions we think are smart in terms of how to address them, but we would welcome engagement from anyone who's spending a full day in a room here at the PUC talking about reliability issues to try and refine those proposals, and then hopefully we can move something forward next session.
Absolutely. We are looking for solutions. All right, Liz, and then Darren, and then we're done.
No,
Oh, okay, sorry.
Look it over here.
I would also encourage the commission to require more transparency and more clearer information and more transparent information. I'll give you just one very simple example. Hosting capacity maps, this is something that solar developers critically need, and we don't have those available in Pennsylvania. They're available in many, many other states. It is a tool that is commonplace and routine in the industry, but isn't in place in Pennsylvania. So the lack of clear, transparent, and factual information is always a barrier. And it's a barrier in your decision-making, in the commission's decision-making. It's a barrier everywhere. And it is replaced by, it's a slippery slope. So it's critically important to look for ways that much greater rigor can be applied to the evidence that's coming before the commission, and transparency, and making that information available to the market in ways that enable the market to bring costs down and keep costs down and move generation into place.
Thanks, Liz. All right, I'm going to hop over to Robert, and we're just going to let everyone have their last comment.
Thank you, Vice Chair Barrow. And Commissioner Zerfas, to strike the balance that you mentioned, I'd refer the commission to testimony that my colleague Tom delivered before the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committee just last month. I will just elevate one point that he touched on briefly during session 1 earlier, which is that we believe that rapid investment in the reliability of the existing gas fleet in Pennsylvania is a highly cost-effective way to address resource adequacy issues in the short term, and that it should be fully explored before considering greenfield investment in any new fossil plants or new gas infrastructure. So just for example, in the most recent capacity auction, I believe the average capacity rating of gas plants that cleared was 76%. If you were to raise their reliability value to an entirely achievable 90%, you could add a dozen gigawatts of capacity to the system, save billions of dollars over the next few years, and delay some of these resource adequacy shortfalls that we're worried about until 2028. So that is just one element, one approach to striking the balance that you referred to, Commissioner Zerfas. And thank you all for this opportunity again.
Thank you, Robert. And that is striking coming from the NRDC. First time I heard Tom say that, I was quite surprised. So thank you. I appreciate that. Sam, are you? Yeah.
Nothing else from me, but appreciate you having all of us, and it's been a helpful conversation.
Okay, Darren.
A couple of final thoughts on balancing those difficult tenets of all this. I think you have to look at it in terms of, are we solving, are the solutions for the next 5 years? I think your comment on the existing gas, I'll come back to that, is a good one. But new gas is not going to solve the demand issue between now and 2030, right? Even if we got conviction in the capacity prices. I think Stu, right? PJM came out with an adjustment to the load study of 1.7 gigawatts of additional demand. Correct me here, for 2026, and 17 gigawatts of additional demand by 2030. That came out from PJM on Friday. So the point is, this is not theoretical. This is on the ground right now. And so in the near term, I would agree, making sure we are not incenting existing gas and to some degree existing coal to shut down prematurely and exacerbate the problem in the near term is probably a good thing. And there's a handful of measures around that. Longer term, Pennsylvania, I agree with Joe. Pennsylvania is sitting in the catbird seat. I mean, it really is the anchor for PJM. And it's complicated, but I mean, if you think about property tax base and jobs, and obviously industrialization and data center demand, not easy, but Pennsylvania is in the catbird seat to pull this off. And Talon wants to be a part of that solution.
Thank you, Darren. Joe?
Well, Gene Yaw, Senator Yaw, always starts off some of his comments with, this three-prong approach, which is, you need energy to create an economy, and once you have an economy, you can deal with environmental issues, which I think makes a lot of sense. Margie's point was good before, which is, okay, that's a three-legged stool, and the one leg's a little wobbly right now, because affordability is, as you're talking about, it's a big issue. Affordability is a big issue, but you need reliability. You're gonna probably prioritize reliability over affordability, and then you get back to the next one, which is sustainability. So it's the Senator Yaw approach. But you might even want to add a fourth leg in now too, and that is national security. Because I think we're coming to the realization that the data center wave is a lot about national security. And that is not, storage may play a little bit of a role. But we're talking about like load that is consistent 24/7 type load. You're not storing power for them. You need to be generating that power for them when they're consuming it. Some of the, the Bitcoin operations and all that, they can cycle a bit. But the data center load is real. And I don't know where Pennsylvania's at from a data center standpoint, but when I go to Ohio, it's explosive. The announcements out there. Virginia, the announcements there. Even a little bit in Maryland right now. And it's amazing to me. And if you look at, clearly, I think the data centers are going to peel off some of the nuclear supply. Obviously, the Talon situation is ongoing. We'll see where that ends up. But there's other nuclear plants that are looking at parking data centers behind their meters as well within PJM. But we're also, and they would prefer green energy, right? That's their preference. They know they can't achieve that with renewables. That's why they moved to nuclear. Now they're starting to recognize they need baseload power, and we just saw the announcement with Entergy down in Louisiana. It's going to be a brand new gas plant to feed a big data center. So, and we're seeing a lot of that stuff in Texas right now. So, I mean, I think data center load is going to rely a lot on gas, probably at the end of the day, predominantly on gas. So, thank you.
Thank you. EJ?
Yeah, just to echo what everybody said, I think, our industry is in a little bit of a different stage than a lot of yours. Oil and gas is pretty well established here. So for us, it's just, starting those conversations, having those, because I don't think a lot of these conversations has happened to begin with in regards to our industry. So number one thing you could do is organize, set those up. That would be great. I think that's the first step. Obviously, permitting and siting guidance would be great as well. But the number one thing is just open up those lines of communication, because I think that's how early we are in regards to our industry in addressing our concerns.
And Katie?
All right. Thank you again for having us. I think, the best thing you can do is create a plan, check and adjust that plan, make sure that you've got policies that support execution of that plan. And as was stated earlier, really think about all the different attributes that you're valuing. So one question is reliability. Another question may be, how clean is it? What are the emissions? How's the land utilized? How's the transmission thought about? When you set up a plan that accounts for the things that are important to your state, to your system, then you can start to see where is it better to invest in infrastructure now and save money later, even though any way you slice it, there will be an investment. And we'll be happy to provide some additional reports and resources after the fact so that you have good info.
Thank you. Thank you to all of my panelists. Y'all have been amazing. We're going to break for lunch now, return to start at 2 o'clock. Thank you.